Okay, so welcome to the next community and developer meeting of Keptn. Today we acquired some PRs from Florian, Moritz, and Klaus. So let's start with a small announcement that finally we release Keptn 0.9.0. So you can find it here in the release. As you can see, the major announcement for this release is that now finally we have the possibility to pause, resume, and abort sequences. Then we have some improvements over the UX in the bridge. We resolved quite some issues, and finally also Apple user with a new Apple M1 can run the CLI. And for the one that have some problems with Docker Hub, now we also have the images on Quai and GHCR. From the early adopters, we also received some feedback for some small hiccups here and there. So we create a new milestone, the version 09.1, which is quite far to be complete. So stay tuned because soon we will have another version of Keptn. And with that, I would give it to Florian to introduce our new feature of the webhook. So.
All right, thank you. So, all right, webhook service. So this is going to be one of the biggest new features in Keptn version 0.10, which we're currently working on in parallel to preparing the 0.9.1 release. So yeah, just let's have a look at what this is all about. So basically, we often got the feedback that it would be nice if Keptn would support from its core a way to define webhooks for executing web requests for certain tasks to be executed in order to not have to implement a new service for every kind of task that you might want to execute. And now with the upcoming version, we're going to support just that. So basically what you will be able to do is a webhook.yaml file, which for example, looks like the following. So we have this webhook config with a certain name. And then here in the spec object, we can define a list of possible webhooks. So for example, in this case, the webhook service will be able to handle the so-called getWeather.triggered event. I've called it in this example. And then you're able to define a list of requests that should be executed when a triggered event for that kind of event is handled. What you will also be able to do is, for example, if you need to pass API token, for example, to this request, you of course would certainly not want to hard code it in this webhook YAML file or anything like that. But in that case, you can define a list of environment variables. So I don't know the exact names of the properties, but in general, it looks like that. So for example, you can then say you want to use a secret called myToken, and then you can reference a secret within your Kubernetes cluster, which you will need to have access to, but this is a story we're currently working on as well. So in that case, you can reference a secret with a certain name. And within that secret, you then can select a certain key, because the secrets are stored as key value maps. And then you can reference it like that. Exactly. And then you can, for example, within your request, you can then use the secret like so. And then you can use this templating syntax in order to reference this secret. And I just recognized that speaking and typing in parallel is really hard for me. But anyway, this is the way it's gonna be working. Of course, we're also gonna be providing a documentation for that. And now to prove to you that it's working, I have set up a project called Weather Station. where I have a sequence that should execute this get weather task that I've just shown you in the Webhook YAML. And now in the background in the terminal, I'm going to send a cloud event that should trigger the weather report sequence. And hopefully in the miracle of time, this sequence should show up. Let me just refresh. All right, I think, yeah, that's the one I just triggered. And as you can see, the Webhook service took over this task, and then eventually it finished. And within the finished event payload, you will then also be able to get the response that you got from the web request. So in that case, we've executed 2 requests, one for getting the current weather in Klagenfurt. Here it's as usual partly cloudy, and also in Linz it's cloudy as well. So yeah, that's basically the current state of the weather of the Webhook service. All right, are there any questions about that?
I have a question regarding the templating.
Yeah.
What if I try to reference a variable that does not exist?
In that case, the Webhook service will generate a finished event with an error, or with the status and or with the result set to fail, and with an appropriate error message where it tells you that it didn't find this particular property.
Thanks.
All right. If there are no further questions about that, let's continue with the other issues. So the rest of those are actually mostly minor bug fixes. So the first one is about the configuration service. So the issue here was that basically when you had a project set up with upstream repository, and then afterwards you, for example, wanted to update the upstream credentials and, for example, updated it with the wrong token, then it basically kind of destroyed the upstream connection, and yeah, basically you couldn't interact with the project until you provided the correct token again. And in the PR that fixes this problem, I've changed the logic such that the configuration service will now check whether the new token is actually able to establish the connection to the upstream. If it is, then of course this will be applied, but if not, it will fall back to the previous credentials, and you will be able to use the project as it was before. Also, when working on this issue, I've noticed a problem that occurred when you created a new project with an upstream repository, and there you already had an incorrect token. So there I noticed that the project wasn't cleaned up properly because the correlating repository was remaining in the configuration service. So now I've added it such that in that case, the repository is cleaned up properly, and then you can basically retry to add the project again with the correct credentials, and then it should work. So basically you won't reach a kind of inconsistent state anymore. All right. Next one, also about the configuration service. So basically the issue here was that Ermin noticed that when he was working on the UI, the bridge for configuring the Webhook service, he noticed that some of the endpoints for managing resources were actually not implemented yet. So for example, the delete endpoint for deleting a certain resource within a stage or for a service was not implemented, and those have been added now in this pull request. Then next one, Lighthouse service. This is also a quite minor issue. So here we had the problem that when an evaluation.triggered event was received by the Lighthouse service, and the SLO file was available, or at least there was a file called SLO, but when there was an error during actually passing the SLO file to the correlating Go struct, then it did return an error, but in the correlating evaluation.finished event, the message was not set. So it was hard for users to actually see what caused this failing evaluation. And this was added in this pull request. So now you will also get that information within the evaluation.finished event in the data.message property. All right, next one, shipyard controller. Yeah, basically, let's have a look at that one. And yeah, exactly. So that's the one. So basically here I worked on hardening this new sequence queue and sequence state functionality of the shipyard controller. And here I handled pretty much the cases where sequence.triggered event was received, but a problem occurred during actually starting the sequence. So basically this contains, for example, when the upstream to the Git repository wasn't working, for example, and the shipyard couldn't be loaded, or if a sequence.triggered event was sent for a sequence that was actually not defined within the shipyard file. And the third one was, yeah, for example, when a sequence in a stage that's not part of the shipyard was tried to be triggered. So in those cases, the sequence state wasn't really reflected properly. So you kind of got a sort of a zombie sequence state, and now the shipyard controller makes sure that these failed attempts of triggering a sequence are now reflected properly, and that change now also propagates through to the bridge. So now you will see those failed attempts of triggering a sequence in the sequence overview, and also with an appropriate error message in the sequence trace when you, to give you a bit more information for debugging this kind of errors. Any questions about that or any of the other issues so far? All right, if not, yeah, not too many left. So another really small one in the shipyard controller. So basically this affects the endpoint for retrieving open.triggered events. So we returned the wrong HTTP status code for the case where currently no open.triggered event for a certain project was found. So of course, this is a completely normal situation in case you don't have any sequences running. But in that case, we, for some reason, returned a HTTP 500 error that was now modified to a 404. No, actually, that's not 100% sure. The 404 is now returned if you want to access the open triggered events for a project that does not exist. So in that case, we indeed return the 404. But if you try to retrieve the open triggered events for an existing project and there no open triggered events are available, then we'll get an empty list. I think that was more appropriate in that case. Of course, if anyone has other opinions or suggestions about that, I'm of course always open for suggestions. But if not, let's continue with the last one finally. So this one was a change in the distributor. Basically, the problem here was yeah, since in the recent version, we now have this uniform overview screen where we also show error logs of the uniform services. Here, Johannes stumbled across the case where he triggered some evaluations that were failing, but actually the workflow of handling or performing an evaluation was done correctly, but just the SLI values were failing, for example. In that case, those kind of failed evaluations were also interpreted as error logs, which then were forwarded by the distributor to the logging API. And with the PR that's associated with that issue, I changed the logic in the distributor to only generate error logs for finished events where the status is set to error, but not the result, because the status actually indicates that there was a real error during the execution of the task. All right, and I think that was the last one. So I'm going to hand over to Moritz.
Thank you. I'm going to share as well here. Okay. So this sprint I worked on two things. The first one is introducing Cypress into Keptn as our new Angular UI testing framework. I actually already created a draft PR and it's mostly done, but not fully. There's a few minor bits and pieces missing, but the plan is to, from now on, have UI tests and component tests in Cypress instead of Protractor before. The only things that are still missing are the CI integration and into our integration test pipeline. And for that, I need to, I don't know, fix some minor things with a headless Chrome browser acting weird and stuff like that. But it's mostly done. And then the second thing I worked on is actually more a research topic, or it became a research topic in the end. I tried to automate the Keptn tutorials, or at least one Keptn tutorial, to be able to kind of use them as tests. And in the process of that, we introduced a new little project in the Keptn Sandbox, under the Keptn Sandbox organization, which basically is able to extract the commands from tutorials if you annotate them correctly. Thanks to Gabriel Tanner, who did most of the work there before, and I kind of polished it up a little bit now and brought the thing up to date. So basically, with that in your tutorials, you could annotate some commands with such a header, and then by running this Go package here, it would in the end spit out a bash script with all those commands inside, which you could then use to be able to faster test your tutorials, basically. And the whole point of that was to, in the end, be able to fully automate the running of tutorials. I had some bigger hiccups, and that's why I basically concluded my research on that with, we need more time for that, more priority, and then maybe this could work out in the end. But at least this smaller project here was a nice outcome of the research. So that's basically the two things I worked on this sprint. Handing over to Klaus.
Okay, thanks. Let me share the screen. Okay. So I was working on the feature to delete or update a service in the bridge. So now it is possible in settings and services to create a service. Up to now, it is just supported to enter the service name, and the resources are not supported yet. So if I just add one service, it takes some while, but Yeah, it takes some time. Okay. Yeah, then it states the service is successfully created. Yeah, the dev environment is a bit low, so it isn't shown up now. Now it is shown up. And yeah, so create service is now implemented in the bridge, and you can also delete it. If you click on the edit icon, you have on the bottom a danger zone where you can delete the service again. So if you enter again the temp service, it is deleted and then it's redirected to the settings page again. And also there is if it finishes, yeah, in the service view, for example, there's also a create service button, and also if you create a project, there's a notification where you can click a link to create the service again. Yeah, and that's basically the create and delete service feature. The next thing I want to talk about is the webhook service. Armin started with this feature and I took over it. So now in the bridge, if you go to the uniform screen, you can now have the webhook service, you can select it and add some subscriptions. For example, yeah, now you can select the view for other integrations, but now for the webhook service, there's an additional webhook configuration. And there you can just simply define the method, the URL, some custom headers like content type or something like that, and a custom payload, and optionally a proxy. And if you create it, then the webhook.yaml file is created for the filters that are set for the subscription. So for example, for dev and staging for the service cards, then it is in dev and staging for cards, 2 webhook files. And yeah, that's basically it. Any questions? Okay, so yeah, that was that from my side.
I have a question. This will fill in automatically in the format that Florian presented before.
Yes, exactly. So if I go here, this is the created file, the API version, webhook metadata, etc., and the request that is
automatically filled.
And that here with method, URL, etc.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have another question. Is there a specific reason why there's only put and post as request types?
Because
maybe get is also useful. I don't know.
I don't know why we decided to not have get, but I don't know the reason behind it.
Okay.
Yeah, with the because with get you cannot send data, because the idea is to have this
you
custom
have a
payload.
custom payload. Yeah, you have the custom payload. This is a required property, and with a get you, it's you have to send data,
okay.
not to
okay,
to get it.
I have another question because I just stumbled over it. If you delete the request method URL and custom payload, are you still able to update the or to create a subscription? But I think this should be still the case, that you can create can you always no subscription without webhook?
Yeah, but this is the webhook service, so
yeah, but we also create the subscriptions with this form.
Yes.
Yeah. Now you can't create any subscription without a webhook.
Yeah.
I guess
that's the case.
We should change that.
Okay.
Good point. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I will fix that.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay.
Then I think everyone had the chance to present its work. Thanks to the team for the great achievement of this sprint. Looking forward for the next one. And with that, I will say we can see each other at the next community meeting. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.